In this episode, this late night episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast, Leif, Thulin, and I, we're going to share our thoughts on some of the prospects who have stood out at their respective or in their respective conference tournaments. Stay tuned. Big shout out to each and every person that has made the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. I'm your host, Rafael Barlowe, along with my co-host, the man that watches more college basketball than anyone else, Leif, Thulin. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. I also wanted to talk about the Locked On newsletter. Check it out at lockedondaily.com. It is your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. And if you are not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, share, comment, click the bell so you can be notified every time we drop an episode, because we are your source for NBA draft content. And with the start of March Madness, that means we are getting closer and closer to the NBA draft. And for some prospects, their draft process starts probably tomorrow. Their season and their careers are over. And we're going to talk about a couple guys that have an early start to their pre-draft process. But we have to start off with the thriller that just ended. For those that are wondering, if you're wondering, it is 12:55 a.m. Central Time, and the Kentucky-Oklahoma game just ended recently, and it was a thriller. Otega-Oweh had a game-winning shot, his second game-winning shot against his former team this season, and it spoiled another strong performance from Jeremiah Fears. But before we get into the individual performances, I just want to hear your thoughts on this game and some of the action from Thursday.
I mean, I had a crazy day aligned anyway with different working things and watching copious amounts of basketball and finding a way to balance it all. And so I started watching this game, and it was 77-65, I want to say. And I decided, okay, I got to finish a few things. I look at my phone, and it's closer. It's like a 6-point game with couple seconds, it's over, and all of a sudden I hear some screaming on the TV. I run back across the house and find the last couple seconds of this game. I have since rewatched the actual comeback, and it was unbelievable. And this is what makes March spectacular. The SEC tournament had 2 game winners and a double overtime game, and it was just the beginning of that tournament. So it was awesome. I felt badly for Jeremiah Fears, who I thought had an excellent performance. And just like last time against Kentucky, fell just short due to Otega-Oweh scoring a not necessarily buzzer beater, but a game-winning shot against his former team. So a really interesting finish, super fun game. And I wonder if Oklahoma is going to be dancing, but they certainly are going to be nervous.
Yeah, they needed that win. But I think the win over Georgia the night before, my days are mixed up, the night before really helped. All right, let's talk about Jeremiah Fears. He had even though, like, if you just look at the box score, you see that he was inefficient, but I thought that he had a strong performance. 28 points, 5 assists, 4 rebounds. He was 10 of 22 from the floor, but he was 2 of 11 from 3. If you take away his threes, he was able to get where he wanted. I think that he has cemented himself as a top 7 pick, in my opinion. But ESPN came out with their mock draft on Thursday, and they had Kasparas Giannis and Yegor Dimit ahead of him. I think that is absolutely ridiculous. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I've been on the Jeremiah Fears train for a while. James and I, we tend to like similar players. He came out with one saying Fears was top 10 early, and I texted him as soon as I said that. I said I just drafted up a board and had him top 10 as well. So he beat me to the public punch, but we were right there in lockstep in November. So I've had Fears top 10 all season, and we did an episode about would we take him or Demon sooner. We talked about should he go back to school and how I don't think that's likely, whereas for Demon it's possible. And I think Fears is the top 7 pick. I think you got to buy the flashes. You know me, I love potential and the ability to become the guy for a team. And I think he's got that capacity. He's lightning quick at getting to the rim. He puts pressure. And like you said, 2 of 11 from 3 takes away how amazing he was from 2. And it makes the numbers different. If let's just say it was 4 of 11 from 3 and he missed 2 of the 2s, that gives you more points and it looks better to the box score readers. But the way he puts pressure on a team really impresses me. And I thought he made good reads today. It doesn't necessarily reflect always in the box score, but I thought the attention he drew, which was considerable considering he scored 28 points, I thought he made good decisions and didn't force shots despite having it going early and often.
Yeah, if you look at just the numbers, you see that he was 2 of 11 from 3, but he hit a big 3 down the stretch. And one of the things that really stands out to me about Fears is that, for lack of a better term, he's fearless. He's not afraid of the moment. We're talking about an 18-year-old kid. I mean, you've heard the story over and over again if you follow the draft. Reclassified up, is supposed to probably be picking out his prom date or preparing for prom, but here he is trying to help Oklahoma get into the NCAA tournament. And he had a big 3 late in the game. And this was after he was like, 1 for 10 at that point, wasn't afraid of the moment. And he had a similar game against Michigan earlier in the year, 4-point play, game-winning play. That's the stuff that doesn't show up in your analytics and in your box scores, that this kid is again, not afraid of the moment. And he had 28 points tonight, and this is the day after scoring 29 points on 8 of 16 shooting in a big win over Georgia. And again, and it's not just recency bias, but I just think Fears has a higher upside than Yakachonis and Yegor Demon, just because he puts pressure on the rim. He still has a ways to go with the shooting. And I think that what he does is what the other guys don't do. Consistently pressure the rim. I think the shooting is going to be fine. I think that's going to be fixed, even though he's enter the game at like 28% from 3. But I love guys that can pressure the rim, and maybe that's just my personal preference. But the fact that he's one of the youngest players, if not the youngest player in this class, and he is like carrying a team in the SEC, the toughest conference in NCAA history, in my opinion, that has to account for something.
The only thing I'd push back, and I love Fears, would be, I think in terms of the highest outcome, there's a world where Yakachonis can shoulder a bigger load. I don't necessarily think that's as likely, but just the way he can manipulate defenses with his size and savvy, get towards the basket, not necessarily rim pressure, but near the basket, and use guile and manipulate defenders and swing the ball. I think there's a world in which his ceiling's higher because he's a better shooter, and the shooting off the dribble is one of the most coveted and valuable things in the NBA. But I feel more comfortable thinking about Fears as being my lead guy because he's wired to score. He puts a ton of pressure, and the creation isn't bad. It's not otherworldly. Like, Demon's an excellent passer. Yakachonis, I think, is ahead of Fears as a passer, but both of those guys are behind where Fears is as an attacker and a scorer.
Yeah, I'm going with Fears all day. All right, up next, I want to talk about Collin Murray-Boyles. He is a player that his career at South Carolina is over. I want to see if Leif has had a change of thought, because I'm turning the corner a little bit. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That is $200 in bonus bets, or 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and who is even cutting down the nets. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There is no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long at FanDuel.com. All right, second segment. I want to talk about Collin Murray-Boyles real fast. Between Murray-Boyles and Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey, it is time for them to start their pre-draft process and look to address some of the weaknesses or some of the concerns that they have coming into the draft. But Murray-Boyles had a strong performance in the loss to Arkansas, 20 points, 12 rebounds. He was 6 of 10 from the floor. But the reason I wanted to talk about him is because the first bucket of the game for him was a three-pointer. We're talking about a guy that has only made 9 threes his entire career. And then he also had a free throw line jumper. So 2 of his 6 baskets were jump shots. So my question for you is, do you think that there's potential for him to develop as a floor spacer? And the second part of this question is, or do you think he's a guy that could possibly surprise you at the combine with the shooting? And he was so dominant on the college level that you really wanted him to shoot if you were the opposing team, but he didn't need to shoot jumpers to impact the game.
Yeah, I think every year at the combine, and I've attended the last 2, I feel like there's guys that impress you with their shot being so much better and more fluid than you anticipate it is because they don't shoot it in college. For instance, last year, Donovan and Klingon and Zach Edey, who didn't shoot threes in college, both were knocking down threes consistently, both in warmups and in some drills. I think he's going to be able to make shots, but I don't think he's ever going to be a guy in the NBA you're worried about beating you from the three-point line. It's a guy that you assign to be the dare shooter who you hope is the guy that if you're going to lose, that's the guy who beats you from the perimeter. And more often than not, those bets tend to be correct in saying that guy can't beat you from the perimeter. But what I do like about Collin Murray-Boyles is he's got these intangibles. And this is going to sound like a weird comparison because the guy I'm comparing him to is an excellent shooter. He reminds me a little bit of a freshman year Keegan Murray at Iowa. And what I mean by that is I watched him and said, wow, like, he gets his hands on a lot of balls. He's not a wow athlete. He's not a guy who's going to jump out of the gym and soar and dunk a ball. He's not going to run in a passing lane and take it away, but he gets his hands on balls defensively. He rebounds, he posts up, makes the right passes. He is active on both sides of the floor, not only isolated, but he can cut. He can do a lot of different things. And if you minimize what his role is, because he was a super heavy usage rate guy at South Carolina, I think he could be a useful offensive player in a couple different roles. So we both talked about him being perhaps overrated in mock drafts a while ago, a couple months ago. And I think that's still possibly true, but I do like the intangibles he displays nightly. And if I wouldn't say necessarily turn the corner to say, oh, he's a top 10 guy, but I'm higher on him on the NBA role being something he can carve out, even with no defined skill set to hang his hat on and being a questionable shooter.
Yeah, fit's going to be important for him. I mean, you can say that about quite a few other guys, but I think for him, he's one of the guys that he's going to really need a front office and a coach that knows how to use him and maximize his strength. All right, let's talk about the story of the day. Cooper Flagg left the game against Georgia Tech early, sprained his ankle, left on a wheelchair, but he was seen on the bench at the end of the game. And right now, it doesn't appear that he's going to play in, I want to say tomorrow, but in today's game. What are your thoughts on this situation with Flagg? And can Duke beat North Carolina without Cooper Flagg?
They definitely can. Will they? It's a little different. I actually was on Locked On Blue Devils today, breaking that down. I think Cooper Flagg should miss the game, and he should make the championship. Miss the championship should they make it there, and get ready. And I wouldn't even mind. I know this sounds bad because you could lose, but if I were Duke, I'd probably bench him in this game if they were to make the next one, the championship, and then I'd bench him against the 16, so he's at his best for the 8-9 game. Because I don't think Duke's going to lose that 16-1, and I get that it's possible, but Cooper Flagg is the straw that stirs the drink for Duke. He makes everything possible on the offensive side, and defensively is one of the best in the entire country. And if he's not right, your championship odds suffer drastically. So Cooper Flagg, I really hope is healthy because I think he could have one of the more fun March runs we've seen in a while.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you said there. Definitely wouldn't play him against North Carolina. If they win that game, wouldn't play him in the championship game. And I think they can beat the number 16 seed without him. So that, I mean, everything you said is spot on in my opinion. But his teammate Kon Knueppel had a strong performance. This was the performance, even though Georgia Tech is a team that was a couple games above 500, but Knueppel stepped up 28 points, 7 of 14 from the floor, had 8 assists, 5 rebounds. Again, not a quad one opponent, but one of the concerns or question marks I've had about Knueppel is he had some games where he just kind of disappeared in the bigger matchups, but he showed that he can carry a team today. Had to play 38 of 40 minutes. But what were your thoughts on his performance?
Yeah, Kon, I think, proved that he's more adept on the ball as the primary creator than I knew. I think Will Hardy, the Jazz's head coach, I work for the Jazz, and so I go to plenty of press conferences. He talked about a lot of players right now for the Jazz due to injuries are playing more minutes, and he says it's not sustainable for a long period of time to step up and deal with the scrutiny of both intense defenses focusing on them and just the energy it takes and getting used to that role. If you're not doing it often, if you're stepping in for 5 games, that's fine and you can do it. But when it becomes more and more frequent, it gets a little harder. I think that's the same thing for Kon. I think he's got the ability to do so, but it's about how frequently he can be that guy in creating. And today he was more than ready and starred in that role. I think Kon in the last 6-7 games of the season has actually done a very good job operating in pick and roll. I still think he's not a big time athlete. So when he puts his feet in the paint, he's going to jump stop, and you can kind of body up against him, and he uses his physical strength. And we talked about the difference between he and McNeely. I think McNeely's a little bit more dynamic with the ball in his hands, but Kon, I think with Duke's spacing and the weapons that they possess, has found a way to influence the game as an attacker and not just a spot-up shooter, someone who attacks closeouts and is the beneficiary of Cooper Flagg's gravity. I think he's got his own gravity, and he's starting to use that to create for others better. And today was kind of the icing on the cake for that notion.
How do you think he'll fare against Carolina, no matter the records, no matter the seeding, a massive rivalry game, as the number 1 guy on the scouting report?
Now, what I think is interesting about that, and I talked about this on Duke's podcast today, I think that he now faces someone who's bigger. So when the last times they played Carolina and the time before that, Cooper Flagg is the guy who draws the most attention, and they try to put size on him. And Duke's smallest players are about as tall as Duke's biggest players, or Carolina's biggest players. But Kon, therefore, because he plays the 2 guard for Duke, would get a guy who's 6 feet tall, and Kon's a big, bulky 6'6", 6'7". I think he gets Drake Powell a handful. I think he gets Seth Trimble a handful in this game and has a more difficult time creating offense than he did in previous times against North Carolina's diminutive backcourt. I do think he'll be the primary operator in pick and roll, and I'll be curious to see how he sprays the ball out to Isaiah Evans, who is the X factor for Duke, and how well Tyrese Proctor, or how much and how well Tyrese Proctor attacks, because Kon, to me, is going to have to shoulder a bigger load. And I'd be a little bit worried if they put Drake Powell on Kon, because I don't think he's the type of athlete that can break free of someone that is of the same size as him when he is the number 1 focus, not someone who is the beneficiary of all the attention that Cooper Flagg generates.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see the game plan. And I'll never forget just laughing at North Carolina's lineup in their first matchup when they had 1 guy on the floor, if I'm not mistaken, that was bigger than Duke's starting point guard. All right, up next, we're going to talk about 3 prospects in the Lone Star State. Have you ever checked your bank account and you wonder, where did all my money go? I know I just did that earlier today. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is very easy to lose track. And that is where Monarch Money comes in. It is your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. And Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending in one place. and you stop just managing your money and you can start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, and even plan your long-term goals. And managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. All right, last segment. Let's talk about JT Toppin. JT Toppin is an interesting player. If you look at the production, you're not going to find too many guys more productive than JT Toppin, especially over his last 3 games. I'm going to just read these numbers out to you. 30 points, 10 of 17 shooting against Colorado, 25 points, along with, let me get the rebounds too. I can't talk about JT Toppin without talking about the rebounds. 30 points, 14 boards against Colorado, 25 points, 11 boards, 3 blocks, 4 assists, and a steal against Arizona State. And then Thursday against Baylor, 26 points, 10 rebounds, 3 blocks, 1 assist. He was 10 of 19 from the floor and made 2 of 3 from deep. I have not consistently seen him as a first rounder on mock drafts. And my question to you is, do you think it's because he measured at 6'7" at the combine last year? That's why people aren't as high on him. At least the draft consensus isn't as high on him as the numbers suggest.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it because he's improved as a player and he's improved skill. His athleticism looks like it's translated not just from the Mountain West where people are saying, oh, he's the best athlete in the league. Well, he went to the Big 12, which is full of elite athletes, and he stands out once again as a premier athlete in the Big 12. He dominates on the interior against the size of guys like Hunter Dickinson or even against Houston, who are rugged with the guy like Juwan Roberts, who's a bit shorter but super strong. He stands out. He does so against Baylor, against Norchad Omier, who's as tough as they come in terms of battling for position. And I watch him play, and yes, Texas Tech draws up beautiful stuff for him. They run a lot of flex action, get him layups. He turns around and gets quick elevation, banks in shots. But he's gotten better from deep, like you mentioned, but he still doesn't wow me from 3. So I think the reservation from teams and scouts is that if he's 6'7", 6'8", and is he a power 4 because he shoots 31% from 3, and a lot of those are wide open because they want him to shoot there as opposed to post himself up on the block and dominate. So if he were 6'11", I think he's a top 15 pick. But because he's 6'7", he plays more like a center than even a power forward. I think it's a little bit scary. He does have tremendous length and goes up and gets rebounds, high points, got good touch around the rim. And I'm super happy he won Player of the Year in the Big 12. I think he should be a second-team All-American, and I wouldn't even bat an eye if he's first. He won't be, but that's how confidently I feel about the dominant season he's had in collegiate basketball.
So here's a question for you, all right? If Toppin, who's listed at 6'9", is really 6'7", then how tall is Collin Murray-Boyles, who's listed at 6'7"? Is he going to measure out at 6'5" or 6'4 3/4 at the combine? And how would that impact his stock?
Yeah, I think he's about 6'6". Toppin's very far longer. Murray-Boyles is kind of a stouter build, but I think that matters for him. But at least look, he already is used to playing somewhat as an undersized 4, whereas Toppin goes from playing the 5 to a 4 that's an actual 4 size, but doesn't have the skill set of a modern day NBA 4. So I understand the reservation. And for instance, Toppin, who's been sensational, and I'll compare him to another player who's not all that similar to him, but has the measurables that the NBA wants at the position that he's playing. So Toppin's playing center for Texas Tech and is a second-team All-American by my estimation, first-team All-Conference Player of the Year in his conference. A team that I think is excellent is Florida. Alex Condon and Tommy Hauck, guys I've been tweeting about for a long time. Alex Condon to me, and I've seen him in recent mocks saying, oh, he's about 45th. I'd take him in the first round, and I did a podcast talking about college basketball aspects, and I made the point of, if you asked me to take 10 players in the SEC, I understand that many are going to take people like Josh Hubbard or small guards who can score a ton, but there's not players I'd take over Alex Condon or Tommy Houck in terms of how good they are at basketball. And I told them, like, as an NBA draft guy, I'd take him as a first rounder. I say that to bring up this. I'd rather draft Alex Condon because he's 6'11" and has a ton of skill. And though he's a rough shooter at this point, it's a similar percentage to a guy like Toppin. But Toppin has to be seen as more of a threat to shoot than does Condon because he's smaller. He's pigeonholed into a role, whereas Condon can develop. And yeah, that's icing on the cake if he makes some. That's make or break for Toppin due to height.
I mean, I think Toppin, with his energy and activity, I think in the right situation, he can carve out a role as a top 8 rotation player in the league. And if he's a late first round pick or even a second round pick, that's a win. All right, let's switch to Tre Johnson. Tre had a big win today, or Texas had a big win today. It wasn't a great shooting night for Tre, but Texas is still alive. And I think they saved Rodney Terry's job. The rumor around here was Chris Beard wanted to come back, and Will Wade is waiting on Texas. But a win for Texas today against Texas A&M, hated rival. This is their second time beating them this year. And the first one was they were down by like 20. What were your thoughts on Tre's performance? He had like 20 points, but it was a rough shooting night, and even had some head scratching moments in regulation where he just didn't get the ball at the end of the quarter, at the end of the half.
That was one of the ugliest entertaining games I've ever watched. I mean, you could watch any possession and say, okay, offensive rebound coming, free throws coming. Okay, they're going to miss some free throws. Now there's going to be a miss, and there's going to be a crazy athlete with his head 12 feet above the rim, and then it's going to be a kick out logo 3 from Tre Johnson. So I was not overly impressed by Tre Johnson in the sense of watching the totality of that basketball game. Texas A&M is a tough team to play because they're physical. They make it, when you drive, very hard to score, and they make it hard for you to score from the perimeter because they like to incentivize you to drive by pressing up super far. Tre Johnson made shots that very few can make. That's what Tre Johnson does. He's a professional scorer. I think that game's particularly difficult as a distributor, which is where I see the most allure in Tre Johnson. And I don't know if I likened him to you or someone else about, the best possibility for Tre Johnson to me is someone you put the ball in his hands and he develops as a playmaker, and he can score 25 in the NBA, but all of a sudden he becomes an adequate playmaker and he's dishing out 6 assists. This was not a game where he could demonstrate that capacity because Texas A&M clogs passing lanes. They make everything, they muck everything up, make it all an athletic contest. And Texas is one of the few teams that has the bodies to win that against Texas A&M. So I wasn't overly impressed by Tre Johnson, but in this game, I'm saying, but overall, I think Tre Johnson's the top 5 pick. And I'm starting to have more and more belief that he could have a clear-cut role, and everyone likens him to scorers, Jamal Crawford and Lou Will, because they're just geared to score. And then, one I thought of was Kevin Martin. But I think there's a real world in which you put the ball in his hands and you say, look, you're our guy. We're going to have other people that can knock down open shots. We're going to have big, strong athletes that can help compensate for your, relative frailty and not great defensive ability. But we're going to put the ball in your hands and you get shots for yourself, and your threat to score creates for others. And I don't mean this to compare him to SGA, but similar to SGA in the sense of SGA is not a true point guard. But because he draws so much attention, so many eyes on him, he creates good looks for his teammates. I think Tre Johnson, with his scoring ability and how adept he is at multiple levels, could have a similar role in terms of, hey, put the ball in the guy's hands who's the best scorer, and he'll find a way to improve as a distributor. And I'm starting to really buy Tre Johnson. I don't think today was necessarily the one that moves his stock up, but I don't think it necessarily plummets it either.
I mean, he had 4 assists. I think he's a very underrated passer. You can look at this Texas team, and it's not the most selfless team. We've seen that, but I think the passing is good. And the SGA comparison, somebody's going to roll their eyes and say you're crazy, but nobody thought SGA was SGA when he was coming out of Kentucky. I mean,
I sure didn't.
he was traded for Miles Bridges, right, on draft night, if I'm not mistaken. And so you just never know how a guy is going to pan out. But Tre is in the middle of an absolutely brutal shooting stretch. He is shooting 26% from the floor over his last 3 games, including an 0 for 14 game against Texas, and he had a 6 of 19 game against Vanderbilt and was 8 for 21 against A&M. But Texas is still alive, and that's going to give him some opportunities to get out of the shooting slump. But let's switch over to, I want to say a rival, but I don't even know if they're rivals anymore because of this whole conference realignment. We're going to switch over to Baylor's VJ Edgecombe. I think Edgecombe, he's grown on me. It's been like a wild ride. I wasn't high on him in high school. Then I was high on him based off of the performance this summer. Talked about that at length. Then I was down on him coming into, maybe down on him in like the first month or so of the season. And now I think he's solid, and I think he's probably one of the safer picks in this draft. What are your thoughts on his 2 games in the conference tournament? He had 19 against Kansas State. And then he had a rough outing against Texas Tech where he was 4 of 13 from the floor, but he chipped in 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and 3 stocks. Has these 2 games in the Big 12 Conference Championships or tournament revealed anything for you?
Not really. I mean, I made the point that I'm terrified of drafting VJ Edgecombe from a team that in the Jazz that has a potential to draft him. And I made the point saying I don't think he's 6'5". I think he's 6'3", and he's shooting terribly. Well, and that was early in the season. That was the case. And I didn't think he did anything positively aside from defense. And then in Big 12 play, he shot, I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but roughly 85% with 43 from 3, I believe is what it was. And, you shoot that 85 from the line, that is. And in field goals, he was over 40%, was getting himself good shots. And I think the pitch for him is saying, look, the thing you need to fix about him, like he can knock down spot up shots like he did. And the way you say he's that good and it's worth a top 3 pick, top 4 pick, is that, look, his handling's not that great yet, but it's a lot easier to develop a handle and shot creation than it is to hone to create someone who has these God-given traits of being able to soar through the air and create, and then also show in Big 12 conference play as a freshman that he can hit 85% of free throws and 44% of threes. And so I still have reservations. I don't think he's a superstar at the NBA level. I don't know if I believe in the upside as much as some do, but it's hard to imagine he fails in the same way because there's just a lot of things he does well enough, and that couples with the elite athleticism. You can turn him into defender. He shoots it well enough. He's able to slash well enough. I don't know if I believe in someone learning how to be a good passer without necessarily the creation ability. Like Tre Johnson, my hesitancy about buying him as a true facilitator is willingness. It's not that he doesn't see it, because he gets open and he finds people that are open. VJ Edgecombe, I don't think, has the coordination and practice of replicating, hey, I'm that guy, I'm going to go score, and if this happens, I'm going to make this read. I just don't think he's there yet, but I believe that the pro staffs can teach people how to do that more than they can teach what he can innately do.
Yeah. I mean, I think he's safe. I think he's a good connective passer. The rebounding, the athleticism is going to be there, and he defends. I think there's some teams that he will be an excellent fit on, whether it's the Bullets or the Wizards. Man, that's how you know I'm tired. I said the Bullets. The Wizards, the Hornets. I think even Utah, he would be a good fit there.
It scares me.
I mean, like, he's going to be better than Cody Williams, though.
Yeah, probably. But I think if you're drafting the top 3, top 4, I'd be pretty scared to say, hey, here are the keys to my franchise if it's him.
I mean, but
that
you got
said,
Laurie.
I'd probably have him at my top 5.
You have Laurie. You already got the guy that you're giving the keys to.
No, that's not the keys. The keys, if you're drafting the top 5, you're trying to get a star that transforms your franchise. And Lauri Markkanen, all credit to him, he is not that. So you need the guy who is the actual guy. Lauri Markkanen is at best a second option. And if you really want to compete, you probably want him as a tertiary option because he's not someone who can put the ball on the floor and create for himself. He's someone who thrives away from the ball and is elite because he's 7 foot and shoots that well. You need someone who can be the guy with the ball in his hands and create for others. I'm not so sure that VJ Edgecombe is that, but I do think there's a world that, he learns how to hit step back shots and he learns how to create because people are scared of his ability to go downhill, that he's able to stop on a dime and score. Donovan Mitchell was able to do that in Utah because when he came out of a draft, he was known as an athlete that was a slasher and an okay shooter. Well, he used his offensive ability to explode to then put fear into the minds of the others, defending him, to say, oh, he's a slasher, stops on a dime and shoots. If VJ Edgecombe can do that, then he's an all-star and potentially more than that. But there's less ball skills demonstrated than even Donovan did playing the 2 guard at Louisville.
I'll never forget. I was there Donovan Mitchell's rookie year in the playoffs against OKC. He ended Enes Kanter's career and probably Carmelo's career too with the way he played. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast. It is 1:30 a.m. Central Time. I got to get some sleep because I am going to the AAC tournament. There's a couple guys I want to check out. Baba Miller is a guy that I'll probably check out tomorrow. I want to see Baba in person. But again, thank you for making the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast your first listen of the day. Check out the Locked On newsletter and please subscribe. Hit that subscribe button, like, share, comment so you can be notified every time we drop an episode. Once again, it's Rafael and Leif. We are out of here.